We've all done it. That quick, almost automatic impulse to judge someone else. But have you ever stopped to think about where that actually comes from? And what if, just what if, the act of condemning others says a whole lot more about us than it does about them? Well, that's what we're going to dive in today, the real anatomy of judgment. So, the source material kicks things off with this story that just perfectly sets the stage. There's this awful rumor circulating about a man in town. I mean, it was so juicy, so shocking that it just spread like wildfire. The author says, the way people were talking about it, you just didn't even think to question whether it was true. It's that whole idea of, well, where there's smoke, there must be fire, right? But then somebody actually does their homework. They investigate, and it turns out the whole thing was completely false. The man was totally innocent. Now you'd think everyone would be relieved, but this is where the story takes a really weird turn. One person is actually disappointed. They say, "Are you sure it's not true? I've already told so many people." Think about that. They were hoping the guy was guilty just so they wouldn't have to admit they'd been gossiping. And that strange, unsettling reaction really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. It forces us to ask this really tough question. Why do we sometimes find this secret, kind of twisted satisfaction in the faults of other people? What is going on inside of us? Now, this isn't just a simple character flaw, like being a little bit petty. The source material argues it's way more complex than that, and it's rooted in these really deep psychological and even spiritual reasons. It actually breaks down our impulse to judge into 4 core drivers. So, here's our roadmap for the rest of this explainer. We're going to look at how judgment is really just a mirror for our own stuff, why we get it totally wrong when it comes to inspiring change, how we become blind to our own need for a little mercy, and finally, how treating goodness like some kind of transaction fuels this whole cycle. All right, let's jump right in with the first reason. And I'll warn you, this one might feel a little uncomfortably familiar for a lot of us because, well, it involves looking in a mirror. This is basically psychological projection 101. When we've got faults or insecurities that we really don't want to deal with in ourselves, you know what's a lot easier? Finding and magnifying those exact same faults in someone else. It's a trick we play on ourselves to feel like we've got the moral high ground. So you see, judgment becomes this powerful defense mechanism. By pointing the finger over there, we're trying to move the spotlight off of us. It's our way of saying, hey, I'm not perfect, but at least I'm not that guy. It kind of lets us off the hook, doesn't it? Now, the second reason gets into this huge misunderstanding of what actually motivates people to be better. So often we think that if we just shame someone enough or condemn them forcefully, they'll snap out of it and change. But the source material argues that this approach is completely backwards. And the contrast here is just so stark. I mean, think about it in your own life. When someone attacks you or condemns you, what's your first instinct? Your walls go up. You get defensive. You resist. But when you feel loved and accepted, even with your flaws, you actually open up. You're willing to listen and maybe, just maybe, consider a different way. The source uses this biblical passage to really anchor the point. It suggests that it's not fear or shame, but the experience of goodness, of kindness that truly creates the space for someone to have a real change of heart. Condemnation builds walls, goodness opens doors. Okay, let's move on to reason number 3, which is about what the text describes as a dangerous kind of spiritual amnesia. When we forget our own screw-ups, when we lose sight of the fact that we all need a little mercy from time to time, we get really quick to demand by-the-book justice for everybody else. And this quote from the source, wow, it just nails it. None are so quick to condemn as those in spiritual pride. The humble will be slow to judge. It draws this direct, unbreakable line between humility and mercy. The people who are most aware of their own baggage are the least likely to go pointing fingers. They know they live in a glass house, so they're not about to start throwing stones. And the final reason really digs into our core motivations. The source argues that when we start to see morality as this kind of transaction, where we earn our worth by racking up good deeds, it almost always leads to a judgmental mindset. So here's the crucial idea. When being good feels like a chore, this heavy burden we have to carry, we start to resent anyone who looks like they're having an easier time. As the text puts it so bluntly, misery loves company. We start policing everyone else, not out of real concern, but to make sure they are carrying the same heavy backpack that we are. Okay, so we've laid out the diagnosis. We judge to avoid looking at ourselves. We totally misread what motivates people. We forget that we need grace too, and we treat goodness like a burden. It's a heavy list, and honestly, it paints a pretty bleak picture. But the source material doesn't just leave us there. It asks the all-important question, if this is the problem, then what in the world is the solution? The alternative that's proposed isn't just about trying harder to be nice. It's a total paradigm shift. It's a solution that's rooted in first experiencing a radical, unconditional love and mercy for ourselves. This passage is presented as the real turning point. The idea is that when you truly get that you are loved, flaws and all, it constrains you, or better yet, it compels you. It compels you to stop seeing people according to the flesh, which is just a fancy way of saying you stop judging them based on their worst moments or from a purely critical human point of view. And this internal shift, it's not meant to be a passive thing. The author says it actually launches us into a whole new way of relating to the world, a new job, if you will, which the text calls a ministry of reconciliation. So what on earth does that mean? Well, simply put, it means you stop keeping score. You stop keeping this running tally of everyone's failures. You shift from being a prosecutor to being an ambassador for the very same grace that you've been given. It's this conscious choice to see the person behind the mistake. But okay, a ministry of reconciliation sounds pretty lofty, right? What does that actually look like on the ground, in our everyday interactions? Let's break down what this attitude really means in practice. Putting this into practice means making a few key shifts. First, you learn to separate what someone did from who they are. You make that crucial distinction. Second, you start treating people not based on what they deserve for their last mistake, but with the same unearned grace you've received. And finally, you just fundamentally change your perspective. You switch from a lens of judgment to one of potential and reconciliation. And this quote really brings it all home. The source of all this mercy is this idea of unearned love. But the evidence, the proof, that we've truly accepted that love for ourselves isn't what we say. It's how we treat other people. Our attitude toward others becomes the ultimate litmus test. So, I want to leave you with this final thought-provoking question. If love leads to this ministry of reconciliation that brings people together and heals wounds, what exactly are we ministering when we choose judgment instead? What are we putting out into the world, and what are we building with our condemnation? Something to think about.